History often remembers kings for their wars and laws, and their lovers for fleeting scandals in court intrigues. Most such stories are bright but brief flashes, burning out in the flames of jealousy or political calculations. But today, we will talk about something else, about a feeling that proved stronger than protocol, more durable than many marriages, and more influential than one could have imagined. Imagine the mid-18th century. The British court is a world of powdered wigs, creaking corsets, and icy politeness. At the head of this kingdom, frozen in the amber of tradition, stands George II, a monarch with a German accent and a soldier's bearing. His life is planned to the minute, his emotions hidden behind a mask of state importance. In this world, passion is something indecent, almost a rebellion against the very order of things. And then, into this cold, ordered reality bursts a woman who was destined to become not just a passing fancy for the king, but his chief affection for 25 years. Her name was Amalia Sophia von Walmoden, a German countess whose name London aristocrats first pronounced with a disdainful whisper and then with respectful fear. She did not try to stage a coup or seize power. She did something far bolder. She settled in the king's heart. Their relationship, which began in 1735, was not a secret affair whispered about in dark corridors. It was an open, almost official union that the entire court discussed. This romance outlived the king's legal wife, withstood parliamentary attacks, and became a target for biting caricatures. But it continued year after year until the very last day of George II's life, becoming one of the longest and most stable royal romances in history. This is the story of how love became the shadow of the crown and a silent force that ruled an entire era.
To understand who Amalia was, one must first understand where she came from. And it's not just about geography. Her story begins in Hanover, in that very cozy German electorate which, by the will of fate, became the personal possession of the British kings. For George II, London was the capital of his empire, and Hanover was his home. It was a world where he could shed the mask of a British monarch and simply be a German aristocrat. And it was in this world, in its very heart, that on April 1, 1704, a girl was born, in whose veins flowed blood perfectly suited for court life. Her father, Johann Franz Dietrich von Wendt, was a respected general in the service of the Hanoverian rulers. Her mother, Friederike Charlotte, belonged to the ancient von dem Busche-Ippenberg family. At first glance, this is the ordinary biography of a noble lady. But if we dig deeper, we will see that Amalia's family was not just connected to the Hanoverian court. It was woven into the very tapestry of its personal life, hidden from prying eyes. In her lineage existed a special, almost hereditary art, the art of charming monarchs. It was a family craft passed down from generation to generation. One could say that Amalia was a hereditary favorite. Her maternal great-aunt, Clara Elizabeth von Platen, was once the powerful and official mistress of Elector Ernst August, the grandfather of our King George II. She was not just a lover, but a true center of power, a woman whose favor was sought and feared. This was the first and most striking example in the family chronicle, but far from the last. If we look at the generation closer, we will see her maternal grandmother, Catherine von Boucher. Contemporaries whispered that it was she who became the first youthful passion of the future King of Great Britain, George I, the father of our hero. This connection did not grow into something more, but it left its mark, laying another stone in the foundation of this unusual family tradition. But the cascade of court connections does not end there. There were persistent rumors that Amalia's father himself was in special favor with George II's uncle, Duke Ernest August of York. What exactly was implied by this favor, court gossips preferred to discuss behind tightly closed doors, but the hint was more than transparent. Thus, Amalia was part of the system from birth. She grew up in an atmosphere where proximity to the ruler was the highest currency and the main goal. For her, kings and princes were not distant, almost mythical figures. They were part of her family history, characters in stories she had heard since childhood. It seemed that fate itself had destined her to continue the work of her ancestors. But before ascending to this slippery and dangerous pedestal, she had to live a short, almost ordinary life of a provincial aristocrat, a life that was to be merely a prelude to her true calling.
In 1727, when Amalia turned 23, it seemed that her life path was determined and laid out on the most predictable and respectable track. She married Count Adam Gottlieb von Walmoden, a representative of another respected Hanoverian family. This marriage was not a union of ardent hearts, but rather a calculated transaction between two noble families. It promised Amalia everything that any girl of her station dreamed of: stability, honor, and a respectable position in society. A quiet and measured life of a provincial aristocrat awaited her, planned years in advance. Imagine her world. Mornings began with household orders, days were dedicated to raising children. They would have two in marriage, and evenings were spent at balls, receptions, and card tables. Her calendar was filled with charity visits and trips to estates. It was a life like a slow, elegant dance where all the steps were known in advance. Amalia was to be a virtuous wife, a caring mother, and the mistress of a hospitable home. She was to dissolve into the shadow of her husband, becoming an adornment to his count's title, and eventually turn into a respectable matron whose main achievement was successful matches for her own children. In this scenario, there was no room for dizzying rises or tragic falls. It was a reliable, safe harbor protected from the storms of high politics and royal caprices. Her ambitions, if any, were to be confined within the walls of her home and the confines of Hanoverian society. Her family history, full of stories of brilliant favorites, seemed destined to remain merely a collection of piquant anecdotes to entertain guests. Amalia von Walmoden, countess, wife, and mother, was following a well-trodden path like hundreds of other women of her rank before and after her. But history, as is known, loves to break the rules and shatter the most reliable scenarios. Sometimes it chooses one person from the crowd and gives him a completely different role, setting in motion a chain of events that change not only his own life, but also the course of time. While Amalia led her measured life, while she raised children and attended balls, the gears of fate were already turning in London and Hanover. The air was electrified with anticipation. Very soon, at one of the lavish receptions, her paths would cross with a man who would see in her not just a beautiful countess. He would see in her a reflection of his own secret desires,
And this meeting, like a lightning strike, would split her ordered world in two, forever changing both her status and her future.
And then that moment arrived. 1735, King George II, as every year, made his sacred pilgrimage to his homeland, to Hanover. For him, a monarch caught in the grip of British parliamentarism and the perpetually dissatisfied London society, this trip was not just a visit, but a breath of freedom. There, far from foggy Albion, he could shed his heavy crown, speak his native German, and feel not so much a king as an elector, a master of his own land. Hanover was his personal secret box, his outlet, his true home. And it was here, at one of the court receptions, that his gaze snatched Countess Amalia von Walmoden from the crowd. He was already over 50, an age when men, especially those in power, seek not so much fleeting adventures as peace of mind and warmth. His life was regimented, his entourage consisted of politicians and flatterers, and then he saw her. She was a little over 30, a woman in the prime of her beauty and charm. Contemporaries did not call her the most beautiful woman of the era, but all, as one, noted her incredible attractiveness. She was a brunette of medium height, well built, but her main weapon was her eyes. Huge, dark, radiant eyes in which all the secrets of the world seemed to be reflected. They lacked the cold hauteur of an aristocrat, but possessed a lively, warm spark that contrasted so sharply with the world of icy masks in which the king lived. For George, it was like a thunderbolt. In an instant, his entire ordered world shook. He, a seasoned soldier and experienced politician, found himself completely disarmed by this woman's charm. A rapid and all-consuming romance ignited between them. The king, forgetting decorum and his age, courted her with youthful ardor. He sought meetings, sent notes, showered her with compliments. Of course, in the close-knit world of the Hanoverian court, such passion could not go unnoticed. Very soon, their secret connection became the main topic of gossip. Everyone knew, everyone saw, but everyone pretended that nothing was happening. However, there was one significant obstacle that could not be ignored: Amalia's legal husband, Count von Walmoden. He was a living, real embodiment of the problem. But for an 18th-century monarch, especially when it came to matters of the heart, any problem has its price. And George II, being a pragmatic man, solved this issue with soldierly directness. The Count was not challenged to a duel or sent into distant exile. He was simply bought. A delicate financial operation was carried out, as a result of which Count von Walmoden received a generous payment, 1,000 gold ducats. It was a huge sum, a royal gesture that spoke louder than any words. All that was required of the Count for this money was one thing: to look the other way, to show noble understanding and not interfere with the happiness of his wife and her crowned admirer. And the Count, being a man of his time, perfectly understood the rules of the game. The obstacle was elegantly removed, and the path for the royal romance was clear.
The deal with Count von Walmoden was not merely payment for silence. It was an act that elevated the romance from the category of secret infatuations to a semi-official, tolerated fact. Now that the formal obstacle was removed, the king and Amalia's relationship blossomed with renewed vigor. It was no longer a fleeting affair, but a deep, almost familial attachment. And very soon, this connection was sealed with the most convincing of all possible arguments. In 1736, Amalia gave birth to a second son, whom they named Johann Ludwig. Formally, by law, the boy was registered as the son of Count von Voldmoden, but in the close circles of the Hanoverian and London courts, no one doubted the real father of the child was most likely George II himself. The birth of this boy became a turning point. For the king, he was a living symbol of his happiness, his personal, secret world that he had found in Hanover. Elated by his feelings, George II began to lose all caution. His trips to the continent became indecently frequent. He no longer simply visited his native land, he practically fled there at every opportunity, leaving state affairs in London to the care of ministers and his wife. Hanover became a magnet, irresistibly drawing the heart of the British monarch. And the stronger this pull, the louder the grumbling became on the other side of the English Channel. By 1738, the monarch's frequent absences ceased to be just a topic for court gossip. They turned into a national problem and a cause for biting mockery. English society, which already did not favor its German dynasty, sarcastically watched as their king repeatedly fled to his Hanoverian beauty. The famous poet and satirist Samuel Johnson, in his poem London, subtly but understandably jabbed the monarch, writing about those who rush towards earthly pleasures and forget their people. Everyone understood who and what was being referred to. The king's reputation melted before their eyes. But if the mockery of poets could be endured, the concerns of the political elite could no longer be ignored. At the very center of this brewing storm were two people whose fates were inextricably linked to the king. His wife, Queen Caroline of Brandenburg-Ansbach, and his prime minister, Sir Robert Walpole. Caroline was a woman of outstanding intellect and political acumen. She perfectly understood what was drawing her husband to Hanover, and, although womanly, this undoubtedly caused her deep pain. As a queen, she maintained icy self-control. Moreover, a completely surreal situation developed at court. George II, in his straightforward sincerity, did not even try to hide his affair. He openly discussed his feelings for Amalia and the details of their relationship, not just with anyone, but with Queen Caroline herself and Sir Robert. An unthinkable but absolutely real political triangle emerged, where the wife and the prime minister were forced to act as confidants and advisors in their monarch's love affairs.
What happened next resembled a carefully staged theater of the absurd, where personal drama became part of high politics. Correspondence has survived, testifying to a completely unthinkable situation. George II, while in Hanover with Amalia, wrote detailed, affectionate letters to his wife, Queen Caroline. In these letters, he described with disarming frankness every detail of his affair, every glance and every word of his beloved. He seemed to be asking his wife not for forgiveness, but for understanding and even approval. Caroline, in turn, read these messages, discussed them with Sir Robert Walpole, and together they tried to find a way out of a situation that undermined the authority of the monarchy. For Walpole, that cunning and pragmatic politician, the answer was obvious. The king's constant absence from London was a far greater threat to the country's stability than his personal life. A dissatisfied, longing monarch, constantly yearning to go abroad, was uncontrollable and unpredictable. Walpole understood. To bring the king back to England and make him deal with state affairs, he needed to bring the source of his happiness to London. he began to subtly but persistently persuade Queen Caroline of the necessity of this step. He argued to her that it was better to have the king at hand with his mistress than not to have him at all. This was a cynical but the only correct political calculation. And Caroline, this remarkable woman, put state duty above her own broken heart. She effectively gave her silent consent to the rival's move. What inner struggle she had to endure, we can only guess. Imagine this scene. The queen, the keeper of the hearth and the nation, is forced to sanction the arrival of her husband's mistress to save his reputation and maintain political calm. This was a sacrifice that history rarely notices behind the glitter of crowns and titles. George II, however, initially showed some tact. He considered it completely inappropriate to bring his mistress to London while his wife was alive, and continued to be torn between two countries, two women, two lives. The Queen bore her cross in silence. Pain, humiliation, resentment, all this poison she kept deep within under the mask of imperturbable dignity. But everything has its end. In November 1337, Caroline's health sharply deteriorated, and it became clear that her days were numbered. On her deathbed, surrounded by a weeping husband and courtiers, she made her last, strongest move. Gathering her remaining strength, she turned to George and said that after her death, he must absolutely remarry. This was a gesture of absolute devotion, concern for the dynasty's future, even in her final moments. George II, shaken to the core, wept, and kissing her hands, swore that he would never marry again. He declared that he would only have mistresses. And then the dying Caroline, with a shadow of her famous ironic smile, quietly uttered in French a phrase that forever entered the annals of the British court. "My God, this will not stop him at all." In this sarcastic and simultaneously sadly tender remark was the essence of their long and complex union.
The phrase uttered by the dying Caroline proved prophetic. Her passing was not just a personal tragedy for the king, but a catalyst that definitively changed Amalia von Molden's status. The last visible obstacle in her path to London had disappeared. George II, having mourned his wife, soon realized that his promise not to remarry gave him complete freedom of action. Now nothing prevented him from uniting with the woman who had become the center of his universe. Already at the beginning of 1738, as soon as the official mourning period ended, he sent Amalia an official invitation to move to England. For the 34-year-old countess, this was a ticket to a completely new, unexplored life. She was leaving behind the familiar world of Hanover and heading to a foreign land, where sidelong glances, whispers behind her back, and an uncertain future awaited her. Her arrival in London was arranged with royal generosity that left no doubt about her new status. Amalia was not housed in some mansion on the outskirts of the city. She was immediately allocated luxurious apartments directly in the main royal residences, in St. James's Palace, the official center of the monarchy, and in the more secluded Kensington Palace. This was an unprecedented step, a public declaration. The king was not just bringing his mistress, he was integrating her into the very heart of the court, making her a part of his daily life. This generous gift finally settled all matters. England received not just a guest or a distant relative, but the king's new official mistress, Mistress en titre, as the French would say. London high society was stunned. It froze in a mixture of curiosity, indignation, and secret delight. Since the reign of the merry King Charles II, whose numerous mistresses were an integral part of court life, the British court had been distinguished by its ostentatious strictness of morals. And now, after decades, the tradition was broken. For the first time since the restoration of the Stuarts, a royal lover appeared so openly and officially at court. And what further exacerbated the situation in the eyes of many, she was a foreigner. However, it is worth noting with irony that the monarchs of the Hanoverian dynasty themselves, who barely spoke English, troubled the British aristocracy apparently slightly less. The new Hanoverian charmer who settled in the palace immediately became the main target for gossip and satire. Pamphleteers and caricaturists received rich material for their venomous creativity. In 1738, a mocking engraving titled "Solomon in Glory" spread throughout London. In it, George II was depicted as the biblical King Solomon, known for his wisdom and numerous wives. The king sat on the throne, and next to him, in a luxurious oriental outfit, stood a seductive sultana, in whom everyone easily recognized Amalia's features. The illusion was crude but effective. The king, like the biblical sage, succumbed to the charms of a foreign beauty, risking the loss of not only his reputation but also his kingdom. England held its breath, watching how this new, unprecedented act of court drama would unfold.
Waves of public discontent even reached the walls of Westminster Palace. In the corridors of the House of Commons, some parliamentarians, emboldened, began to grumble. They said that the sovereign was excessively engrossed in love affairs, neglecting the kingdom's interests, and that the upkeep of a foreign mistress placed an unbearable burden on the treasury. However, this was only a whisper. No one dared to openly condemn the king. The monarchy, though limited, was still the sacred cow of British politics. Meanwhile, the government, led by the ever-pragmatic Sir Robert Walpole, chose the only possible tactic, not to fight the new phenomenon, but to cooperate with it. Walpole, who had supported the idea of bringing Madame von Waldmoden to London from the very beginning for the good of the country, now took the next logical step. He began to build a relationship with her. The Prime Minister perfectly understood a simple truth. A content and happy monarch in his personal life is the key to political peace and stability. A king whose heart was calm was much more agreeable in state matters. Therefore, Walpole not only did not hinder Amalia, but also showed her marks of attention, demonstrating his respect. He saw her not as a rival, but as a potential ally, a key to pacifying his impulsive and stubborn master. For Amalia herself, this was a period of a complete break with the past. To fully legitimize her position, it was necessary to eliminate the last legal formality, her marriage. In 1739, she officially divorced Count von Waldmoden. The process went surprisingly smoothly. The abandoned husband seemed to have no remorse, accepting the generous compensation for his compliance. There were rumors that the king once again showed unprecedented generosity. The count received not only a lump sum payment as before, but also a lifetime annual pension of 4,000 ducats. This was colossal money that ensured him a comfortable existence for the rest of his days. Freed from the bonds of marriage, Amalia could now fully dedicate herself to her new, brilliant role. The culmination of this process came in March 1740. George II took a step that definitively inscribed his beloved's name in the history of British aristocracy. He granted Amalia the official title of Countess of Yarmouth, making her a life peeress of the United Kingdom. Along with the title, she also received British citizenship. This gesture was not just a gift to a beloved woman, it was a political act. From now on, she was not just Madame von Waldmoden, not just a German newcomer. She was Lady Yarmouth, a full member of high society who had to be reckoned with by everyone. And most notably, Amalia became the last royal mistress in British history to receive such a high honor, her own peerage. After her, this tradition,
dating back to the Middle Ages, would cease forever. The era of titled mistresses was fading into the past, and Amalia was its last bright star. Having received a high title, a life peerage, and a secure position at court, Lady Yarmouth could have followed the well-trodden path of many royal favorites before her. She could have started weaving intrigues, dismissing unwanted ministers, demanding lucrative positions for her relatives, and capriciously interfering in state affairs. London society, frightened and intrigued by her appearance, expected exactly that of her. But Amalia surprised everyone. Instead of reveling in power, she chose a completely different tactic, the role of a quiet, cautious, and devoted companion. This was the main secret of her incredible success and political longevity. Contemporaries, even those who were critical of her, noted her astonishing discretion. She did not strive to become a second queen or a grey cardinal. Her main, and it seemed only goal, was to please the king and maintain his mental balance. She intuitively understood what many before her did not. The power of a favorite lies not in ruling herself, but in providing the monarch with that island of personal happiness for which he would be willing to do anything. Sir Robert Walpole, observing her, once ironically remarked that Countess Yarmouth seemed to think primarily about anticipating and fulfilling His Majesty's every wish, even the most insignificant. And there was a lot of truth in this joke. Of course, it would be naive to think that she had no influence at all. She did, but it manifested not in loud political démarches, but in quiet, behind-the-scenes conversations. She discussed any delicate issues only with George II, in private, in the comfort of her apartments. She never allowed herself to publicly express her opinion on politics or give advice to ministers. However, rumors quickly spread through the court that much could be achieved through Lady Yarmouth. Those wishing to gain the king's favor, be it a coveted peerage, a profitable contract, or a court position, knew whom to approach. They said that her favor could be bought for a generous reward or earned through personal sympathy. She became an informal channel to the monarch, a kind of back door to the royal cabinet, and the smartest politicians preferred to befriend her. The king, in turn, was immensely grateful to her for this wise restraint. He showered Amalia with gifts and honors. In addition to magnificent rooms in the royal palaces and a generous monetary allowance, he gifted her fabulously expensive jewelry and works of art. But the main gift was his unwavering affection. George II appreciated that his beloved never staged scenes of jealousy or tried to take the place of the late queen. On the contrary, Amalia always subtly and elegantly emphasized her status. She was the king's beloved woman, his lady of the heart, but not the sovereign. She created an ideal world for him where he could be not only a monarch, but also simply a man who was loved and understood. Thanks to this well-calibrated tactic, she managed to preserve his undivided love and trust for an incredibly long time, almost a quarter of a century.
Years passed, and imperceptibly to everyone, Lady Yarmouth's role underwent another transformation. From a quiet and devoted companion, she turned into a completely indispensable person. Time relentlessly took its toll. King George II was aging, his once sharp gaze grew dim, his hearing weakened, and the once strong monarch increasingly withdrew from the bustling world, closing himself in his personal universe.
And in this encroaching silence and twilight, it was Amalia who became his eyes and ears, his living bridge connecting him to reality. She was the only person he trusted implicitly, the only voice he always heard. Now ministers who wished to convey their petitions to the sovereign or discuss an important state issue had to act through her. They came to her apartments, explained the essence of the matter, and she, choosing the right moment and the right words, conveyed this information to the king. She knew how to soften sharp corners, could gently hint at the necessary solution to the monarch, or conversely, convey his orders privately, avoiding official red tape and possible conflicts. Her influence became absolute, although it remained informal. She did not sit on the Council of Ministers, but no important decision was made without considering her opinion. Amalia, Countess of Yarmouth, the former Hanoverian aristocrat, became the most influential person in the British Empire after the king himself. This amazing story of love, partnership, and power lasted for 25 years, a quarter of a century, a whole epoch. Their union became as integral a part of the British court as the changing of the guard or parliamentary sessions. It seemed it would be like this forever, the aging king and his faithful companion meeting the sunset of their lives together in the peace and quiet of Kensington Palace. But fate, so generous to Amalia, was preparing one last, most cruel blow for her, and it followed with merciless suddenness. It all ended in the early morning of October 25, 1760. 76-year-old George II woke up as usual and prepared for the new day. Nothing foreshadowed disaster. But suddenly he felt unwell and he collapsed on the floor. Ironically, his departure was so swift that neither doctors nor servants nor the very woman who had dedicated her entire life to him were nearby. The king, who for a quarter of a century could not imagine a day without his Amalia, left this world in complete solitude. And at that very moment, when his heart stopped, the entire world that Amalia had so long and meticulously built around herself, her status, her influence, her future, all of it crumbled in an instant. The era of Lady Yarmouth had come to its tragic finale.
The new monarch, the young George III, was a man of entirely different character than his grandfather. Raised in strict rules, he strove to create an exemplary virtuous court, where there was no room for scandalous affairs and official mistresses. For him, the existence of Lady Yarmouth in the royal palaces was not just undesirable, but an unbearable reminder of an era he wanted to leave behind as quickly as possible. Amalia's era ended the very second her king's life did. She understood this perfectly. However, George II had taken care of his beloved's future. According to his will, Amalia von Walmoden received more than a generous allowance, a lifetime pension of £10,000, a colossal sum for those times. She was also allowed to retain the title of Countess of Yarmouth until the end of her days, and even keep her London apartments for a while, to settle all affairs without haste. It was a magnanimous farewell, but not an invitation to stay. Amalia, with her years of experience in reading between the lines of court etiquette, caught this signal unmistakably. Her role at the British court was played out to the end. She did not cling to the past. Almost immediately after George II's funeral, Amalia gathered her belongings without any fuss, said goodbye to the few remaining friends, and left England forever. a country that never truly became her home, but gave her a quarter of a century of an incredible life. She returned to her homeland, to her native Hanover, to the very world from which royal passion had once torn her. Her circle had closed. The Countess spent the rest of her life quietly and in seclusion. Here, in her beloved Hanover, no one blamed her for her affair with the king. On the contrary, she was once again among her own, the German nobility, a woman with an amazing destiny, a living legend who was accepted with respect and curiosity. She lived for almost 5 more years after George II's death and departed this world in October 1765. She was 61 years old. According to surviving records, the cause of her death was breast cancer. But the story of her legacy does not end there. It takes a final, completely unexpected turn, linking this court drama to the great battles of the future. That very boy, Johann Ludwig, who, as everyone whispered, was the king's son, grew up and had a brilliant military career. And his son, Amalia's grandson, and very likely King George II's grandson, entered history under the name of Ludwig von Wollmoden-Gimborn. He became a famous Austrian cavalry general, a hero of the Napoleonic Wars, who fought against the French, including in the service of the Russian Empire. Thus, the blood of the Hanoverian Mistress was shed on the fields of great battles, inscribing the last, most unexpected chapter in her amazing story.